It isn't just that all measurement has error. It is that measurement can't tell you what to do. Humans interpret those measurements, and humans determine actions based upon, or not sometimes, those assessments. So, what do those basic facts of assessment mean for educational assessments, and in particular, assessments of school building principles? Principle LE rather than AL1. For complex tasks, assess actual performance, not the knowledge that might be involved in performance. Our individual goals for public education, and this is not even to mention our social goals for education, our individual goals are complex. College and career readiness, productive contributors to communities and citizens of a democracy, healthy lifestyle, and fruitful family members. Sorry, I had to put that in there somewhere, Mary. And those certainly all involve a complex constellation of tasks. It's not enough to know that smoking causes cancer, even if my neighbor smoked and didn't die of cancer, but rather that I not smoke. It's the performance that matters, not the knowledge. But let's use a governmental policy example. Get a driver's license. Involves exhibiting some knowledge of the rules of the road, usually via a multiple choice test. It's a pretty inexpensive assessment to administer. Its reliability from one administration to the other is pretty high, and since the machine scores it, the iterator reliability is pretty high as well. But we wouldn't think of giving someone a driver's license for the first time without seeing if they could actually drive. This is an example of a performance assessment as well as multiple measures. But it's also an example of assessing only a proxy of the entire goal. When I took the exam and when my son took the exam, we parallel parked, we backed around a corner, we turned left, we stopped at a stop sign, but we did not drive in traffic, or in a heavy rain, on a freeway, or in snow on a country road, or all the other things that drivers will face. So it's also an example that measurements do not measure the entirety of the desired universe and cannot, provide absolute certainty. There are still bad drivers and there are still accidents, but multiple measures that include a performance assessment improve the odds in our favor. Principle 2, assessment should be educative. When assessment in education became more of a science and more used on large scale, which was really around World War I, there were two sets of assumptions that guided its development. The first were around intelligence. Intelligence, or for lack of a better word, was assumed to be relatively fixed, that intelligence as measured was what mattered for success, and that there was a continuum of intelligence, and that people were relatively fixed on that continuum. You were a little bit less intelligent, we'll put you over here in the Army in World War I. You were a little better on that intelligence, on that scale, we'll put you over here in a different set of tasks during World War I. That's really where this all kind of began, or got government investments. And in that example, it's important to note there were roles and there were tasks available for people all across that continuum. Okay. Today, neither of those assumptions hold true anymore. Number one, we know that cognitive ability is not fixed. And we also know that there are other elements of success, that other things matter, such as grit and creativity and innovation and other things that we now know much more about. We also know that all of those things can and do change over time based upon the influences in one's environment. Two, we also know in today's world that there aren't enough roles and tasks in the world available for all the people across the continuum. Jim Clifton writes in his book, The Coming Jobs War, there are 5 billion people in the world who are over 15 years old. 3 billion of those people said they worked or wanted to work. And there are 1.2 billion full-time formal jobs. There's not enough to go around anymore. Thus, assessments have to be educative. Their goal can no longer be just to sort people, but rather to educate people. It is possible and it is essential. The goal of education is education. If an assessment only tells me that I'm better than you or you are better than me, and it does not help educate both of us, then it is a waste of time and a waste of money and has fully anticipated and known harmful outcomes on all of us. So finally, and you thought I would never get here, let me use an example of a principal performance assessment that we are beginning to develop to meet these principles. Our goal is to create a performance assessment that meets multiple functions. And in this case, the performance assessment that I'm going to give the examples from are for a principal or school building leader prior to getting to a credential. So it's pre-service credentialing assessment in effect. One, the first function. It is to assure the state of its capacity to meet its legal and ethical responsibility to only grant a principal's credential to someone who's demonstrated the necessary performance to safeguard the educational rights of our children. Okay? We don't give somebody a driver's license until we see if they can drive. We need to see if they can be a principal for putting our kids in their hands. 2, to enhance the learning of the individual candidates for the credential. I'm trying it out. I ought to be able to learn something from the use of this assessment. Otherwise, it's probably not educative, and I said earlier that makes it a waste of time and money. 3, to improve the preparation pathways, regardless of those pathways, their capacity to educate the candidates in their care. So learning is both for the individual candidate, it's also for the people charged with preparing the candidates. It's important to note that obviously we have these 2 educative goals, and that's this principle, but it's also responsibility oriented as well. Responsibility and education are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they are mutually interdependent. You simply cannot have one without the other. This assessment system will allow the state, and the state we're working with, anybody from Massachusetts here? Yay, Massachusetts. We're working with Massachusetts on this, and it's say good things about the state of Massachusetts. They gave us a contract, which is good for Bank Street, but they're also, this is actually work that they're doing and that they're implementing statewide, and I'm bragging about it, so I might as well share the bragging with Massachusetts. Okay. The first issue to deal with then, going back to the what we did is that we're components of the system, is what the heck does a good principal do? Okay. Because leadership is complex, so when you define what a principal needs to do, you define performance tasks. In the case of the drivers, it's turning left. That's a performance task. So what are the performance tasks, and how do we know that turning left is going to say that I'm a safe driver or not? What's the equivalent of that? What's a good task for a principal? Well, leadership is complex, and it requires their moving parts, complex tasks. So therefore, the assessment that we're developing will have 3 to 5 tasks. Each task will have multiple components which assess 2 or more standards. Okay, the notion that you have a standard or a goal, and that you therefore have a test question or an assessment for each of those, is antithetical to the notion of performance, because performance requires the integration of tasks. So these tasks, these 3 to 5, are going to require candidate evidence of integration of the constructs or the standards underneath it. They have to reflect the complexity of leadership. They have to require the authentic work that is part of the lived world of educational leaders. They have to include sufficient documentation of the contextual information to enable the person rating the performance to know whether it's good or not. The world is different in a school at a middle school in the Bronx and in a preschool in Westchester. There's a different worlds in different contexts. And so the answer to any educational question is always, it depends. And so the important thing is to figure out what the it depends are and make certain that people making the judgment know what the right it depends are. The tasks have to be robust enough to limit the capacity to game the system. Look, I do not think it's okay, or it should be anticipated that cheating is going to happen if we assess something. I find that assumption, frankly, personally, to be abhorrent. I don't think we should assume that people are going to cheat if they're competing with each other in some way, shape, or form. But to be on the safe side, it's always better to decrease the temptation by making it difficult to do so. The tasks, the performances that we're asking people to do have to include the process. They have to show how they're planning for it. They have to show the end result. What were the outcomes of what they did? and they have to show evidence of learning from that experience, because the capacity for continuous improvement is an essential standard for principals. I'm going to skip the next part because it gets even boring for me. Since our goal for principals is not to recreate what is, but to create better schools and improved outcomes for all of our children, one task, for instance, could focus on continuous improvement. Okay? So if we want all of our principals to create better schools that result in improved student learning for all of our students, what does that mean? What would that look like? What would they have to know and be able to do? Well, we think they'd have to understand the principles of high-performing schools. What does a good school look like? What's your goal for that? But they also have to be able to execute the steps to plan, guide, and manage continuing improvements. For instance, knowing where to begin, how to coordinate and pace the improvement initiatives. They have to be able to build the capacity to develop widespread understanding of what school change intends to accomplish among constituents. For instance, what constituents to engage and how. They have to promote the strategic engagement of the stakeholders. How do you analyze data, and how do you present that data and information to guide the improvement process and keep people on board and rowing in the same direction? They have to engage their staff and their community in an inclusive process that forges solutions to problems that produce better outcomes. Okay. What resources need to be mobilized? Okay. They also have to understand the systems implications of implementing, managing, and sustaining change. How do you engage, for instance, central office support if you work in more than a one-building district? One possible task to assess this performance would be to develop a comprehensive school improvement plan, since that's the performance we're asking about. The plan should focus on improving the performance of all students, including those who are most at risk. It should be based on current school data, student, teacher, and program. It should reflect the research-based practices of highly effective schools. It should acknowledge contextual barriers that need to be addressed. It needs to identify mechanisms and strategies for engaging stakeholders. It needs to indicate the allocation and the reallocation of resources. It needs to specify a timeline and the tools that will be used to monitor progress and to make necessary in-course adjustments. In the best of all possible worlds, this would take place in a preparation pathway where there was a clinical component before they were allowed to do it individually, so they could actually do this performance in a real school with real kids and real families and real communities.